House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has warned that Republicans, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, will soon be moving to ban abortion nationwide. Let's play a clip of that.
Because of Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, and the Republican Party, their supermajority in the Supreme Court, American women today have less freedom than their mothers. With Roe and their attempt to destroy it, radical Republicans are charging ahead with their crusade to criminalize health freedom. In the Congress, be aware of this, the Republicans are plotting a nationwide abortion ban. They cannot be allowed to have a majority in the Congress to do that, but that's their goal. And if you read, and again, we're all studying all this, but if you read what is in the very clear, one of the justices had his own statement. It's about contraception, in vitro fertilization, family planning. That is all what will spring from their decision that they made today.
And Emily, even though you and I couldn't disagree more on this issue, I'm glad we can talk about it because I have found you to be unusually honest when it comes to this question. So many conservatives kind of hedge and couch, where the movement is actually going. No, it's just about leaving it to the states. No, it's just about a 20-week ban. No, it's really only late-term abortion. No, we're fine with exemptions for incest and for rape and the life of the mother. No, don't worry. Whereas I found you to be more upfront about like what the actual goals of the movement are. And so, how would you classify Pelosi's warning there?
It's interesting because there's a schism in the Republican Party, and we've talked about this. I brought this up. We talked about this early in the show. I firmly believe that the Republican establishment has placated the pro-life movement and is probably not super happy with this decision. They think it's politically damaging. They tend to be more socially liberal. If you go back and look at the 2012 autopsy, which didn't mention abortion, but you could kind of read that into it, saying that the party needed to liberalize on social issues, which would put them more in step with the personal beliefs of a lot of people in Washington, D.C., that they socialize with, et cetera, and also with what they think is politically helpful. So I don't know that you're going to see like the pro-life movement's goals. I don't think Nancy Pelosi is far off on that at all, because I think if you believe that life begins at conception, which I understand sounds crazy to other people, but this is my interpretation of the science, and that's where I come down on the question. If you believe life begins at conception, then you do have to reconsider Plan B. You do have to reconsider morning after pills. You have to reconsider certain forms of contraception. You have to reconsider IVF. And I know that sounds extreme, and I know things have been mainstreamed really quickly, but my sort of personal perspective from 30,000 feet on that is we had a lot of technological advancements that happened in the second half of the 20th century really quickly, and they were adopted really quickly. And there are good reasons to reconsider some of them at this point. But the honest perspective on this absolutely is that for the pro-life movement, those things are going to be on the table. For the Republican Party, that's a different question.
And were you surprised to see Clarence Thomas kind of say that out loud in his concurring opinion with this decision?
Yeah, so let me see if I have the quote from Clarence Thomas directly. I don't have it up, but I think he said something that actually, I'm curious for your take on this. The left should be fully in with Clarence Thomas on what he said. He said, this ruling applies to abortion, but in the future, the court should consider whether the right to privacy applies as it has been applied in the past. And the reason I think the left should be eager to adopt that standard and have that conversation is because when the court rooted Obergefell and Roe and other decisions in the right to privacy, that is not the most solid constitutional foundation for those rights. So if you believe in the right that Obergefell found, find a different place or a different legal justification for it, and stop relying on this reflex with the right to privacy that I think Roe really started to normalize in left sort of judicial circles.
And my response would be that this isn't really about where the actual rights are rooted and in what amendment or in what kind of reading of the Constitution. It's about the votes. And if you've got 6-3, you're going to be able to do what you want. If you don't, you don't. Clarence Thomas, we have some of his quote here. He writes, quote, in future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. And if you reconsider them under the rationale of this Alito ruling, it does seem that they all fall. None of those can stand up. And I want to read some of the dissent to see if you agree that, in fact, this new ruling would actually make all of these cases unconstitutional and overturned. So the dissent is talking about the 14th Amendment here, and they write, if the ratifiers did not understand something as central to freedom, then neither can we. Or said more particularly, if those people did not understand reproductive rights as part of the guarantee of liberty conferred in the 14th Amendment, then those rights do not exist. That's summarizing Alito's opinion. As an initial matter, they write, note a mistake in the just preceding sentence. We referred to the, quote, people who ratified the 14th Amendment. What rights did these, quote, people have in their heads at the time? But of course, people, quote, did not ratify the 14th Amendment. Men did. So it is perhaps not so surprising that the ratifiers were not perfectly attuned to the importance of reproductive rights for women's liberty or for their capacity to participate as equal members of our nation. Indeed, the ratifiers, both in 1868 and when the original Constitution was approved in 1788, did not understand women as full members of the community embraced by the phrase, quote, we the people. And it goes on from there to say that some of our most celebrated and proudest achievements here at the Supreme Court are as we have expanded what is understood as we the people. And they mention Obergefell with legalizing marriage equality. And so if you say that, well, hey, look, in 1868 there was no legalized marriage equality. It's not in the Constitution. So therefore, we don't have it now. Like, that's basically the same ruling that we have with Roe. Isn't it the case that all of these fall? And run through real quickly, Griswold, Lawrence, Obergefell. What kind of established rights here would we see collapse?
Yeah, I mean, I think sexual freedom. That's what those cases pertain to. And the question, though, is from the perspective of what they're arguing is, if you are going to root this in the 14th Amendment, if you're going to say this is based on a right to privacy, then it has to be predicated on this sort of originalist understanding of the law at the time. That is a logical way to interpret the right if it's enshrined in the right to privacy. And that's why I think it was always a mistake. As you say, Ryan, it's about the votes. Like, this is the Supreme Court has become just like a naked sort of ideological power tug of war. And in that tug of war, you get Roe, you get Obergefell, and whatever you think of the rights that came from those decisions, it's always felt like sort of judicial mental gymnastics to get to that right. And there are better ways. If that's your perspective, I think there are better ways to get there in terms of rights. And the other thing is, the Constitution has sort of worked on this question of abortion in that plenty of states now have done what they believe their people want in terms of abortion access. And the right to privacy question aside, that's all going to be on the table for sure going forward.
Just feels like what good are constitutional right? What good is a Constitution if it's telling us that Oklahoma can just ban contraception? Oklahoma can ban consensual sex between men or between women. I mean, that's Lawrence is consensual sex. Griswold is contraception. Do we not have? Are those rights just up for grabs now? Every 2 years we'll put them on the ballot box, and if you move from one state to another, now you're no longer married.
And this is something that we've dealt with what they're talking about in the dissent is a very real problem, that the founders had the perspectives of white men of privilege, and that might sound like leftist language to anybody on the right that's watching, but it's true.
It's a fact,
they absolutely had that privilege. They absolutely had that perspective. And so, for instance, can Oklahoma suddenly say the 19th Amendment doesn't apply in Oklahoma and women can't vote in Oklahoma? No. And that's why it's better to find. But I see what you're saying, right? That like this is we're all getting caught in the judicial tug of war, and that disturbs me. I think probably as much as it disturbs you. Which is why I think sort of deciding these issues with votes on the state level is, probably with the consensus of people in different communities is probably, even though it seems counterintuitive, a more stable way to decide some of these questions. Congress is constantly punting to the courts. It's constantly punting on these questions. It doesn't pass meaningful legislation for the most part anymore, which is partially why we're caught up in this judicial tug of war. And I think I'm as disturbed as that about that as you are.
It just seems like having like the community vote on, let's say a contraception fails for a teenager, she gets pregnant, and having the community vote on whether she can get an abortion, or a bunch of my kids' friends are in same-sex marriages now, like putting that up for a vote among the community, whether or not they can continue to be married, just seems just so backwards.
It seems, no, I understand, it seems cruel because that's part of the problem of this judicial system that we've gotten ourselves into, is now there's like this weird attempt to put a genie back inside of a bottle that is very bizarre and difficult and will absolutely have cruel implications. I don't think there's any way around that. And I think that's partially why people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg would look back on the logic of the Roe decision and say, this was a mistake. This is going to be a problem for the left at some point, because this right to privacy is just not the best place to root what is.
Right, but then they fixed it in Casey and went with due process, and they're like, well, we're throwing that out too. It feels like nothing was there was no like argument that would have satisfied Alito here. He doesn't like abortion, and he wants to make that the law of the land, right?
Whether there is an argument that would have satisfied him is actually a very interesting question, because Casey is a great example of why that's an interesting question, because there were Republican-appointed justices that did not side in the way a lot of conservatives would have wanted them to for years. And so I think the pro-life movement, as we call it on the right, has had a very big victory today, accomplished basically what is always been thought of as impossible with particular appointments that learned from what happened in Casey. But that is a point that's well taken.
Yeah, and so protesters and probably celebrants are already headed down to the Supreme Court. Well, you're actually not in Washington, D.C., so you won't be there, but I'm going to head down there now that we're wrapped with today's Rising. But is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, not at all. Senator Rubio is already out with a framework to protect families, to support families and mothers in a post-Roe world, which, as you say, Ryan, is now the world. And I think we will see some good proposals coming out from Republicans. I'd encourage people to keep an eye on those. But other than that, I hope that you stay safe, and I hope everyone around the country, as these demonstrations flare up, whether they're celebrations or protests, stay safe as well.
That's it for today's Rising Friday. Alayma, Lauren, and Robbie will be back in the studio on Monday. I will be gone next week, but Emily will be back in the studio. Have a safe weekend, everybody. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, check out our podcast. You can get it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. See you soon.
Don't forget to leave a review if you like Ryan's new haircut.
There you go. That's right. Thumbs up on the haircut.
See you next week, everyone.